Hey everyone, and welcome to your Microsoft 365 backup checklist for 2024. Today's webinar is sponsored by Veeam and produced by Actual Tech Media. Speaking of Actual Tech Media, my name is Keith Ward. I am with that very company, and I am thrilled to be your moderator for today's event. But before we get there, we do have a few housekeeping items I need to cover to help you get the most out of this session. First up, hey, we want your questions. Ask them in the questions box in your webinar control panel. At the end of today's presentation, our experts will go over some of the top questions that you ask, so keep those coming throughout. Now, that Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues you might be experiencing. If that happens, if you can't hear something, see something, if the slides aren't working, give your browser a refresh or two. That should cure the problem. If it doesn't, let us know and we will hop right on that issue and try to help you out. All right, next up, the handout section right next to that questions tab has some great free resources that you should check out right now. Especially take a look at the two great Veeam handouts that we've got for you today. They are 8 benefits of a backup service from Microsoft 365 and another PDF that is a Microsoft backup guide. So get your hands on those and download them. In that handout section, you'll also find a link to the ATM Decisions group, which is a panel of IT decision makers that you can apply to join to participate in more in-depth events like this and other opportunities not available to others. You'll also find a link to the ATM Events Center, which has our calendar of upcoming events just like this one. See if you like anything that's going to be happening and sign up. All right, finally, at the end of today's event, we are going to be making one of you $250 richer in the form of an Amazon gift card. Now, you have to be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize. The official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found also in that handout section. Just scroll to the bottom, and you'll find the link with the super boring details right there. And with that, let's get to the main event. What do you say, folks? I sure want to. And you don't have to listen to me anymore. So it is my pleasure to introduce you to our presenters today, who are Edward Watson, Principal Product Marketing with Veeam, and Patrick Benson, Senior Systems Engineer, also with Veeam. They are up to bat now. And Edward, I am going to hand the mic over to you, sir.
Hello and good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. My name is Edward Watson. I'm a Principal Product Marketing Manager at Veeam, and I'm joined by my colleague, Patrick Benson, who is a Senior Systems Engineer here at Veeam as well. We're excited to talk about this checklist today. We always do this every year. Really sets the stage for people just searching backup vendors, want to know various criteria as they investigate this new market for Microsoft 365 backup they might be in. So without further ado, let's dive right in. If you are on this webinar, you do know, hopefully by now, or maybe this is top of your radar, that this is one of the most critical data sets, evolving data sets within our landscape. It is heavily attacked, unfortunately, and is definitely becoming much more of a candidate for those ransomware attacks. In fact, 53% of organizations said that they had experienced some form of data loss or corruption in SaaS applications. So in general, that includes M365, it includes applications like Salesforce as well. And ultimately, of those applications, they actually, less than 25% were actually able to recover 100% of their M365 data. It's definitely one of those, Patrick, and I'm sure you agree, it's definitely coming on the radar a lot more for organizations.
Well, Ed, unfortunately, it's getting even worse. You see, the bad actors are becoming more and more sinister. Now, thanks to technology such as what Veeam has introduced with our immutability and our encryption, we've been very, very good at preventing encryption of data or deletion of data from ransomware if you enable that on your backups. But now, these organizations, they're holding you at ransom for exfiltration. They're taking the time now to actually contact organizations like the feds to rat on you. You've been attacked by ransomware. We know we did it. If you don't pay us, we're going to report you. they're also doing it with your users' information, taking that sensitive, critical information, social security numbers, credit card numbers, medical records, and saying, if you don't pay us, we're going to sell this on the black market, and we're going to let your end users know where we got it from. And the horrible part of it, you can't win. The moment they have that, pay, don't pay, it doesn't matter. They're still selling it. They're still going to do whatever they can to damage your reputation. And I think that's actually the new wave of ransomware. If they can't get your data, if they can't destroy your data, I should say, they're going to make sure that they go after your reputation.
Right. Which I guess they're equally worse, but once your reputation is tarnished, you're pretty much out of business at that point.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But I think with all of that happening, I think more and more organizations, just to kind of level set here, at least within our own existing survey, we're skyrocketing in terms of the backup adoption for Microsoft 365, which is good news. I think organizations and of course the smart folks listening today, you guys are the primary drivers of this adoption. And you can see that drastic evolution of third-party backup adoption, but then also in tandem, that decrease in the reliance, or shall we say, making sure, really the understanding, shall we say, that the built-in functionality just isn't enough. It's not what backup is. It's not what organizations should define as backup, those built-in capabilities.
Mm-hmm. It always goes back to Microsoft's shared responsibility model. They'll guarantee the service as best they can, but the data, it's always your responsibility. And what organization doesn't want to have control of that to begin with?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's dive straight into this checklist now that we've kind of level set. Number one is something I think that at Veeam we really hold very near and dear to our hearts, and that is allowing customers to deploy any way they want. And that's really something that you should be, that should be at the top of your list. So here we have software only. So that's your kind of traditional download the software, deploy on any storage. And then you should also be looking at vendors that offer not only the software only piece, but also offer other options like cloud-based, backup as a service, where you essentially would log into a web browser and not have to install any software locally. Of course, the third option that any good backup vendor would have is the option for fully managed. So you can see that as you're evaluating what your backup strategy should be, a lot of it centers around how much management does your organization want to do of that backup? Do you want to have to manage things like the architecture and the infrastructure and the storage, or do you want to simply completely offload that to a backup vendor or have it fully managed with a partner?
Right, and being able to have these options, but still have one software behind it all, Ed, to me is a huge advantage when it comes to Veeam. You can go and read the product documentation for our VB365 and know exactly what your managed BAS is doing behind the scenes. This is the way that we're able to give our end users so many choices, so many options that fit what their organization does. Some teams are going to have lots and lots of talent. They want to keep it all in-house. They have regulations or whatnot, and therefore software only, it's the only game in town for them. But smaller organizations where the talent might be in charge of many, many different things can still adopt a managed backup as a service platform and understand what Veeam is doing behind the scenes, and talk to those partners, those service providers intelligently, instead of just saying, well, it's a magic box where my backups go to.
Yeah, and not to dwell on this one too much longer, but I think it's also worth noting that a lot of vendors will try to sell you on our way is the best way, right? Mm-hmm. So make sure you're working with a backup vendor that is not trying to sell you on their way, but your way, right? So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I don't know how many of our attendees today have managed backups in the past for email, let alone the vast communications applications that we have available to us today. But I did it back in the day when They didn't even name software by the year. It was just version 5.5, if anyone remembers that version of Exchange, and if you do, I pity you. You know, these tools were incredibly complex, incredibly difficult to run. But now to have all these options, I wouldn't be afraid to be an email admin again.
Yeah, right.
And I think that kind of goes into point number 2. You should investigate inclusive offerings, right? It's no longer just about that server residing in your data center. Even that changed in like the early 2000s, where you had multiple servers residing in multiple data centers. And all those resources that came about was very, very difficult to manage, right? I had to work very closely with my infrastructure team when planning out our Exchange environment. But with MS365, now, all of a sudden, I could have the service up and running. What changed? The retention, the storage requirements. Because we had solved with MS365 the service problem, now we could have the platform for email running all the time. Now we could have the Teams, the OneNote, whatever we needed, SharePoint running all the time in the cloud. That was great. The organization suddenly wanted to retain backups for longer. Storage on site became a premium. It really was difficult to keep up. So now I can look at all-inclusive offerings. This is such a huge advantage. I can have unlimited storage with some of these backup as a service solutions. I can have unlimited retention and therefore be compliant with what the legal department may say I have to do. I think that this really is the future of where we're going. Nobody wants to give up data anymore. Nobody wants to hear that backup doesn't exist or that aged out. Talk about, some things you're going to face, like maybe legal searches, right? Trying to find that one email to prove your case in court. Well, you're going to need unlimited storage, unlimited retention. And with our offerings, you have those options available from more than one vendor.
Yeah, and I think it's also worth cautioning the folks that are evaluating different vendors, when a lot of vendors say they offer unlimited storage, sometimes it's not really unlimited. And sometimes there's a lot of hidden fees and things of that nature. Make sure you work with a vendor that really provides that at no additional cost. That really is what that inclusive offering should deliver.
Well, you just triggered something, Ed. I forgot to mention, now that Veeam has our backup as a service through Cirrus, did you know that if you were to ever decide to leave Cirrus, you can actually take that data with you? Did we talk about that later, or?
I think we'll get more into that later on. Yes, absolutely.
All right, little tidbit to keep people interested.
Absolutely. So point number 3, and this should be obvious. This should be something that isn't something we mention, but it is because it's important, right? So storage platform choice. Now, you'll find that a lot of vendors in market, they might be more Microsoft leaning, they might be more AWS leaning. They might include less options. They might not have Glacier. They might not have cool or cold, different options. But make sure you work with a vendor. And I think that's something at Veeam we've really taken very seriously, is being storage agnostic, right, Patrick?
Oh, absolutely. That agnostic approach forces us actually to be better. And by that, what I mean is we can't choose a favorite and then rely on the storage to solve problems for us. No. We have to be open to different ways of doing things and be compliant with each one of these solutions APIs. So what does that mean? It means tighter integration with these third parties. It means tighter integration with the products and the platforms that they provide. How does this help a customer, though? I mean, it sounds great, on paper, but what does this really mean for me as an organization? Let's say I've invested a lot in developing my AWS talent. Well, then an Amazon S3 Glacier approach might be just fine. I'm going to go straight AWS all the way. Okay. Then the next organization right next door, well, for them, it's all about ingress and egress fees. Well, then a Wasabi storage might be the better choice for that company. The point is, we cannot dictate to your organization what should be a priority. You're going to tell us, and then we can present you with these options. By having these options, you get a custom fit, not a solution that's out of the box and that you have to work around, but a solution that actually fits into the routines, the priorities, the situation that you find yourself in. So Ed, I think from there.
Yeah. Take us through the immutability advantage there, Patrick.
Yeah, I think once we've established that we can work with all these different platforms, right? That we give you all these options. There's still some things that are table stakes, and one of those is make your data immutable. I talk to customers all the time, and when it comes to immutability, I'm actually a bit scared by how many still don't have an immutable backup of their MS365 environment. But we make it so easy. So when you use a Veeam solution, when you set up your object storage repository, which would be Wasabi, S3, Azure Blob, any one of those, IBM Cloud, right? We talked about those. You can have it be immutable. And by having that immutable copy, that goes back to what we said earlier about what ransomware attacks are like. They can't destroy your data. They can't delete it. They also can't encrypt it, right? By having that immutable defense, you can also now start to set up things like data separation, right? You can have those agnostic immutable backup copies. And then the recovery confidence. Knowing that it can't be altered means that when I restore it, it is exactly as it was at the moment I captured it in the wild. All this comes together so that when you have your storage, when you have your backup immutable, and the bad guys cannot alter it. And by bad guys, I don't just mean ransomware gangs. We have malicious employees, unfortunately. We have to think about that, internal threats, or just the occasional mistake. Because we have this immutable copy, we have that confidence that, okay, we're going to the backups, and what we put back into production is accurate. It is correct. It is valid data.
Yeah, I think you absolutely hit the nail on the head there, Patrick. So number 5, take a hybrid approach to backups. Believe it or not, many vendors will actually not support a completely hybrid environment. It's, we never know where, a data loss incident is going to originate. Is it on-prem? Is it, in M365? Where is this? So being able to completely have visibility and manage whatever data loss incident, whether on-prem or in the cloud, really gives us that flexibility to make sure that we're able to mitigate that risk as quickly as possible. Anything to add there, Patrick?
Well, if I were going back to when I was on the customer side, something that I always had to have available to me was a test environment where I could make changes, where I could play around with things and see, okay, the business wants to retain this data now for 90 days instead of 30 days. What's that going to do? How much growth is that going to be? The problem we have when it comes to MS365, right, is that you're paying for those services. So sometimes testing is really, really difficult to do unless you're able to take your data and put it into, like you said, a hybrid environment where maybe I have some on-prem resources available to me. This to me is huge. I can see what the impact will be on SharePoint. I can see what the impact will be on Exchange. I can see what happens when I increase my OneDrive by messing around in my lab, but I'm not using resources that I have to pay for in MS365. That's just one way that this could be an advantage. Another approach is that because I have hybrid, if for any reason there's ever an outage of MS365, although I may not be 100% ready for every single incident that would cause, an MS365 outage, let's face it, that's a big deal. That's why Microsoft works so hard to make sure it doesn't happen. But if it were to happen, isn't it great to have a hybrid environment where at the very worst, if you think about it, someone can call me up and say, hey, Patrick, I can't get into MS365. I need this email. It's important to this deal. Don't worry. We'll go to the on-prem version. I'll grab it for you. I'll send it to you in another format. You'll get it. It's okay. I'll share it to you via a file system, whatever it takes. The point is that I, as someone who's very interested in resiliency, I want this option because I never want to put all my eggs in one basket. As resilient as MS365 is, and I give nothing but praise to the engineers on what they did, even they will tell you, hey, plan for the worst, plan for an outage, at least have an idea of what you can do. Having a hybrid environment empowers me to get around that type of scenario.
Excellent points. Thank you for that, Patrick. Now, yeah, take us through the backup control. Gosh, that's pretty important, don't you think?
Well, I think backup control is huge, right? Because let's face it, backups used to be something that it was an afterthought, right? Yeah. Nobody really cared. Backups is where you went to retire from your IT career. That's no longer the case whatsoever. Backups are so valuable because now data is the most valuable thing that your organization owns. It's more valuable than gold. It's more valuable than oil. Data is where it's at. So that data, if it's so valuable, it has to be regulated. I have to make sure that only the right people are able to see it, able to access it. And here you can see we have a couple of examples. We have the scope example. Entire organization applications, teams, user sites, dynamically add with Microsoft 365 groups. That's one way for me to make sure that you are empowered, that you have the data that you need. But the exclude scope example, sites, teams, users, dynamically exclude with Microsoft 365 groups, that's a way for me to prevent you from accessing things. So maybe I have an MS365 group for the executives, and they're given privileges to see sensitive information, but the rest of the organization is included on the exclusion list. So that way, if they're non-executive, they can never see it. All of this, again, allows me to adapt the solution to the organization instead of turning around and saying, hey, I'm gonna just force everybody to play by the solutions rules. On top of this, I'm talking about user access, what we're doing. On top of that, I can also say, don't back up teams. Don't back up the sites in this situation. That allows me to keep things that maybe I don't want to have, such as, hey, this OneDrive, we're gonna exclude this because this is where we put some sensitive information. It shouldn't be backed up. It's something that's really just transient. We just use it for when we need it, then we get rid of it. All sorts of examples of that. Usually that's, keeping compliant with local regulations. And with that, if we're able to control what and how we're backing up, Ed, why don't you talk about the frequency at which we have to back up?
Yeah, so I think, most of the folks on this call, I'm sure, understand the basics of RPO and RTO, right? So determining the frequency, or determining rather like how much data we're willing to part with, because RPO, say you're backing up, once every, say, few hours, you have the potential to essentially lose 2 hours worth of data. And it's really up to organizations today to decide how much data they're willing to part with. On the Veeam side, we are able to back up as low as every 5 minutes. That's a very, very low RPO. So depending what your risk tolerance is, you really have to make sure that you have RPOs and RTOs that are aligned with that. But I think the benefit of being able to customize the backup frequency with a solution like Veeam especially is our ability to not only allow that low RPO, but also allow you to customize your RPOs based on the value of the user data. So if you have a C-level that wants to be backed up every 5 minutes, you can do that. Maybe there's other departments that are less critical, shall we say, that maybe only need to be backed up every few hours, or maybe even once a day, depending what sort of the criticality of the data is. So really making sure that you're working with a vendor that allows for that customization per the value of the data, very, very critical to make sure you have that in your checklist.
Absolutely. In fact, one example that jumps to mind for me at universities, you
Yeah.
may want that faculty to have a very tight RPO and RTO, especially maybe for research projects. But what if you're also servicing the students? Well, maybe one 24-hour RPO and 24-hour RTO is fine for a student, and it's not applicable to the faculty and staff. That's just one scenario. We see this in many, many different organizations. And it really goes back to options, right? We need options. We need to be dynamic. And recovery options are just as critical. We've been talking so far about how we're very, very flexible with creation of the backup. Now that we're talking about RPOs and RTOs, recovery options are just as critical because we can't make the assumption that what we have backed up from will be available to restore to, right? That's the way disasters work, unfortunately. So obviously, restoring to the original location, being able to send it to the new location, being able to be very, very granular. Maybe I'm not restoring everything in that email folder, but I'm going to get the most important messages, right? I'm going to get the most important emails. I can then wrap it up into a zip file, send that off maybe to a legal team because we did some type of e-discovery work for them. The point is, by having these options, by not being forced to do it one way, I'm going to be able to accommodate your organization. And if you think about it, I'm sure if I asked for, raise of hands, how many people have unique needs within their own organization across different teams? Majority of people would raise their hand because while I might need something as an IT admin, legal might need something different, marketing might need something different. I can't assume that one solution fits all. That's why at Veeam, we always focus on the options. We always focus on being versatile. And another thing is that if you're not versatile, how resilient are you? Well, radical resiliency is what Veeam is all about. This is a way you achieve it. Diverse options make you radically resilient. I think I'm going to push that onto our marketing team. Matt, can you help me out? I want them to push that diversity equals radical resilience.
I will get back to you on that, Patrick. So self-service restores, gosh, that's a question that comes up again and again. And this is something that Veeam has taken very seriously. We've created our self-service restore portal, which really enables you to offload a lot of those routine, we won't call them critical restores, but just like those restores that don't require much time or much effort or necessarily much forethought. So it really just takes a lot of the load off the admin's plate. And so look for solutions that have that. That's a great advantage, but also make sure that there's heavy security. Make sure that MFA and other make sure that your users aren't able to access the underlying infrastructure, right? Make sure that it's definitely a secure restore self-service mechanism would be my advice there.
Well, and I think you're spot on. One of the nice things about the MS365 solution is that Veeam built in the self-service restore portal. So we have two ways to use that. One is that the end users can get things back, right, themselves. I don't have to go through the process of making requests. I can take care of it. Therefore, I'm not spending as much time waiting for a response. That's great. That's a good approach. But we also have a role called the restore operator. And what that means is that maybe I don't give the keys to the kingdom to the help desk, but I do give them the restore operator capability. And now my help desk, if they receive a request, they can now go into the web portal for the self-restore and they can choose other users' mailboxes. Now, they're not in charge of the backup set. They're not able to make changes to that system on the back end, but they are able to facilitate the needs of the end users, help those people who may not be comfortable doing a restore, and get the data back without compromising the organization. So you can see right there, automation and scalability. Because organizations can take that self-service approach, they can be faster. The time savings, like I said, we're not bothering the one backup admin or team of backup admins. We're able to either take care of it ourselves or go to our help desk, which has been designed for that, right?
Yeah.
And then finally, that enhanced security, as you said, we can have that multi-factor authentication. We can require for the restoring of the data, but we can also make sure that if someone is only supposed to restore data, they don't have the ability to change or alter the backup schedule itself. All of this comes together when you're building diverse solutions, right, for organizations that have diverse needs.
Yeah.
Which to me comes back to how can we use backups beyond just protecting the data? There was a time where all backups did was ensure you had a get out of jail free card if you were to ever have hardware failure. Go to tape, get the data back. That's all it was really meant for. We've already talked about how you can use your backups to restore to a test environment, do lab work, things like that. But now we're seeing that backups are a critical part of e-discovery. So now you can use the Veeam tools to do that. You can do this. Actually, we've been doing it for a while. I shouldn't say now you can do it. For a long time, you've been able to do it. You can explore those backup jobs, and you can get very, very precise. You don't have to search the entire infrastructure. You can pick one single user. You can pick one single folder within that user's mailbox. Exploring single organizations, exploring all ignoring organizations, exploring point in time. And the way that Veeam does it, if you are the backup admin, you're able to use a very powerful Boolean search tool on our solution. But if you're a self-service restore, you have a simpler version of the tool, limited in scope, that makes sense for an end user. So by having this e-discovery capabilities, I'm not just taking a backup, I'm giving my organization ways to respond to various common incidents, right? I wish I could tell you we didn't live in a litigious society, but we do. And you're going to have someone, whether it's justified or not, at some point bring a lawsuit against you. This is how you prepare your side for that case, how you get your lawyers up to speed by giving them what they need in a timely way. So, Ed, I'll turn it back over to you. We've been talking a lot about options.
Yeah, so speaking of options, we want to get into some of the Veeam stuff now. And so I do want to cover the fact that we do have a software-only option. Of course, that's the traditional option that we've had for over 7 years. And that's your simple download of the software. You can deploy it on any backup infrastructure, any storage options, the ones we've covered today. And of course, you can back it up whether on-prem or even with cloud object storage. Now, the Veeam BAS product is something we're going to focus on a little bit more today, and that is our Cirrus for Microsoft 365 solution. And that is where the backup infrastructure and everything is taken care of by us, by Veeam, yet you still have control over the backup. You're just offloading a lot of the management and maybe some of the complexity and sometimes hassle that comes with the backup infrastructure. Of course, we still have and have had for many years our Veeam service provider partners, and those are individuals and organizations that essentially manage everything from you for you from soup to nuts. So everything from the backup jobs to just infrastructure, everything completely offloaded. So we have these three options today. Many vendors in the market, you will see that they maybe have the one on the left, maybe they have the one in the middle. You will not see that they have all of these three options the way that Veeam has today. So moving forward here, Cirrus for Microsoft 365, we really want to, make sure that you guys really understand and get a feel for what this solution is all about. So Cirrus for Microsoft 365 really takes our industry-leading solution with over 18 million users protected to date, Veeam Backup for Microsoft 365, and basically gives it a modern feel, modern twist, right, with this as a service model. So everything's included, like I mentioned, and it really takes that very complex solution that is very highly customizable, and it simplifies it into an as a service solution. So we're excited to give you a quick look at that in a little bit. But how does that actually look like, Patrick? When we break down the different services on the next slide, how does this actually look?
Well, so the thing that I love about the Cirrus for Microsoft 365 solution, just to kind of level set here, is that when we decided to build a backup as a service solution, we took a moment and we said, wait a minute, let's see what's already out there. So when we acquired Cirrus, one of the reasons why is because they had already built what we would have. Everything is Veeam on the back end. They basically took our software, followed our best practices, and then used our API to build an amazing front-end website, a web portal. So now, instead of going out there and acquiring some solution or having to build this from scratch, what we found was the backup as a service that we would have built as Veeam. So how does this manage service delivery? Well, the core components, it's all handled by the Cirrus team. And this is running on an Azure environment, right? So you're going to get great performance because we're pulling MS365 data into an Azure environment, so you don't have to worry about that. The operations, again, that's all handled by the Cirrus team behind the scenes. And then automation of the updates, the patches, network security, everything that I, as an administrator of my own platform, would probably have to spend a great deal of time on, never touch it. Always going to be handled by the Cirrus team. What do I take control of? Well, we go over to the user control side, and you can see I'm creating the backup jobs. I'm the one who's determining what's being backed up, how frequently, and when. Then we have the restore. All that's still under my control. I don't have to worry about it. It's something that I can do at my leisure. I don't have to put in a ticket to Cirrus. That's able to be done by me. And the e-discovery, finding it, again, that's all available to me through this amazing web portal that Cirrus has put together. Now I have other optional configurations here. You can see the backup operations, the security, the analytics. All of this is stuff that I can use to actually just enhance the experience, right? I can customize my backups. I can alter that retention period. I can have different teams have different schedules. That's fine. The security, they made a great portal for setting up different role-based access control. So I can turn around and I can empower other users, but again, I don't have to give them the keys to the kingdom, right? I can restrict by the IP address range. I can diversify the storage repositories. This is, again, talking about how we give you the options. And then finally, the analytics. If I'm going to be acquiring a service, I need to prove that it's valid, that it's actually solving the problem. All these analytics allow me a way to show the organization, to show the higher-ups that, yes, Cirrus for Microsoft 365 is meeting our retention needs, it's meeting our backup requirements, and here's some other benefits you may not have been aware of that the organization is getting. So moving on to our demo end, I'm going to pull up a walnut that we have here, and that should be right here. So folks, I'm going to take a moment just to explain. We're going to show you some of what Cirrus can do, but if I can advocate for all my field system engineers out there from Veeam, ask your sales rep, ask your Veeam SE to give you a demo of both the MS365 solution and the Cirrus solution all in one, side by side, because I believe there's great value in everything we have to offer today. But right now we're going to focus on this. This is our Cirrus for Microsoft 365 walnut. You can step through this yourself. As you can see, our dashboard provides a great amount. So let's get started here. Here's our backup status. We can see whether or not the jobs are being completed. No problem there. That's some critical information for me as a backup admin. But how many of my users are being protected? Sometimes that's a difficult question to answer, believe it or not. When people are like, oh my God, now that you ask, I don't know if we're backing up that new team we just acquired. Likewise, when it comes to retention, are we actually hitting our retention goals? Are we doing things the right way? Well, with this dashboard, I can tell the organization quickly, yes, we're getting there. All right, the MS 365 license activity. I don't want to overbuy. I also don't want to underbuy. So by using this, I can actually turn around and say, okay, here's how many we have active. Here's how many we have inactive. That's something that only Cirrus provides, as far as I know. I don't think there's another solution out there that has that. Continuing, right? We have it right there. Sorry, I'm moving around a GoToMeeting here as well. So the licenses widget shows you the number of active and inactive licenses in your organization, right? But that last number, unprotected users, that to me is critical, because let's talk about some common occurrences. Acquisitions. I have customers come up to me all the time and say, we just acquired this smaller company. I don't know what I'm protecting. Well, if I had this, I could pull them into my MS365 org, and I could quickly say, okay, I need 250 more licenses to protect the acquisition. And then, of course, our storage use. I want to know how much we're using. Now, this is unlimited storage, so that's great. But as I mentioned before, Ed, something that I really, really like about Cirrus is that if I ever decide to leave Cirrus, maybe I decide to go the software route and manage it myself, I can actually take over the Azure Blob contract from Cirrus, and I'll know exactly what I'm going to be spending because I can see the storage use right now. That's amazing. That to me is also a sign of competence. We're not just telling you use Cirrus. We're saying, and if it doesn't fit your needs, here's your exit plan. Here's how you can take your Veeam backups and move on away from us. That's okay. Who does that? Only organizations that know they're in a position of strength, that know that they can meet your demands, that know they can meet your needs. They're the ones that are going to make it easier for you to leave because you're more likely to stay. Now, these widgets are shortcuts that can allow us to do our typical Veeam MS365 backups, and all the great players are still there. You still have Outlook, you still have SharePoint, you still have OneDrive, you still have Teams, and we can still be very granular. We don't have to back up all 4 of these. One team, maybe I'm just going to get their Outlook. Another group within the organization, maybe I'm going to back up their OneDrives and their Teams. And recent user activity. I can go through here and I can see everything that's being done under my account. I don't have to contact Cirrus. This is all available to me right up front. That's important because if something were to happen, I don't want to have to go through a third party and wait for them to deliver the logs. I want to be able to just go in, look, and say, hey, this is unusual. I want to dig into this more. And as you can see, you can always view to get more detail. Now let's move on. We have our backup jobs. We have our search capabilities right there, easy to reach. You can actually choose, as I said, which of the services provided by MS365 you're going to focus on. You can alter your notifications. You can also set up to notify others. And then your settings, your support, your profile, all of this ready to use on demand. So I think that, as I said earlier, if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty of all this, if you really want to see how it all compares, reach out to your Veeam sales team, ask your SE to provide a demo of the backup solution versus Cirrus, and you're going to see that everything you can do in our software, you can do in Cirrus as well. But the nice thing about it is that because we give you all of this, if you know Veeam backup for 365, you know Cirrus. If you know Cirrus, you know Veeam backup for 365. It's just, how can I put it, Ed? It's investing my time in learning one solution and being able to use it across multiple organizations.
Absolutely. And I think so much of the struggle for many organizations today is having to piecemeal different vendors that have different capabilities. And I think with our vision and what we're doing here at Veeam, it's very much, look, you really truly can use one vendor for any workload is our vision. So So thank you for the demo, Patrick. So to wrap up, guys, get your QR codes ready. We've got a few takeaways here that are going to help put you on the right place. But ultimately, to summarize everything, there's one takeaway here. It's Veeam gives you options, guys, right? So whether as a service, whether you want to manage yourself, whether you want to leverage a Veeam service provider partner to manage it all for you, we allow you the freedom of choice. And feel free to snap this QR. This will actually guide you to the right direction in terms of getting you started. If you're interested in getting a demo like Patrick mentioned, a real deep dive into Cirrus and have that experience, you can definitely reach out, and we're more than happy to get you started here.
Yeah, I deliver those demos all the time, and it's wonderful because every organization I meet with has a different need. And it helps me to better understand what my customers are going through in the field. I swear, I learn more from those demos than sometimes my customers do because they have such unique problems. And yet I'm still able to solve them because I have such a versatile tool. As you said, Ed, we have the options. We don't force you down one path. We recognize that you may choose a path less traveled. And because of that, what you need is a tool that's flexible and a tool that adapts to the organization, not a tool that dictates. So, do we have any questions at this time?
Actually, we do.
Oh, we do? All right.
Yeah, we actually do. And a lot of these questions that we have actually center around immutability and unlimited storage. So let's dive into a few of these. So is the unlimited storage tiered based on the age of the backup? Is one question, Patrick.
Is the unlimited? From what I understand, when it comes to the Cirrus, it is not based on the age of the backup. It's based on the retention schedule, which is slightly different, right? But with the unlimited storage, it really doesn't matter, does it? You're able to retain. If you have let's say an infinite retention schedule, it's going to be there because you have an unlimited storage. You don't have to worry about, we're about to run out.
Okay, another question here is, how do you set up immutability for backing it up like Sober?
So that comes down to Azure Blob now supports immutability. So that's actually a feature of the Azure Blob storage, and it's just activated. So when you set up a storage repository, you can now choose for it to be immutable with object storage on Azure Blob when it comes to Cirrus. But when it comes to the software solution, Wasabi, AWS, IBM Cloud, any S3 compatible object storage that uses object lock, we can have immutability enabled on it.
Yeah, and I think to be clear, I think the scale out repository, that's more of a Veeam backup and replication.
Well, when it comes to Veeam 365, you're going to set up repositories, and we can go direct to object. And again, now that all of the major object storage providers are supporting immutability, it's just a feature that we manage. I want to be clear about immutability, folks. It's not something that Veeam provides. Immutability is a feature of the storage, but what Veeam does is manage that feature on your behalf. And why do you want us to manage it? Because if it's set up wrong, you could end up with something you can never delete, something you can never get rid of. When Veeam sets up that lock, when Veeam sets up the immutability, it's going to match your retention policy. So unless your retention policy is keep it forever, you can ensure that because Veeam set it up, if it's set for 30 days, you will keep it for 30 days and no more. That's really the power of having our solution, because every single solution out there may do it a little bit differently. Azure Blob does it different than AWS. If you have a hardened repository for traditional BBR, it does it a different way. But because Veeam takes the approach of we're policy driven, you don't have to worry what the underlying storage is. We'll manage that immutability according to the API that is set up for that storage.
Yeah, and just to be clear, folks, we're talking about immutable backup copies is the functionality that we have today, the capability we have today. We will soon have, definitely on our, it's definitely something we're looking at creating in the future is the initial backups and having immutability tied to that. But as of what's on the truck today is the backup.
The backup copies.
How do we back up private Teams chats is something that's come up here in the question, Patrick.
Well, we can actually, there's an option to choose to either back up private Teams or never to touch it. And with some organizations, I'm sure that you'll want to actually disable a backup of private Teams. But it's really just a checkbox within setting up the jobs for Teams backups. So again, we're doing everything via the MS365 API. That's a feature that we're now able to control. So you can either choose to enable it or disable it. Many organizations actually would prefer to have private Teams not backed up at all because they see it more as a communications tool that was never meant to be part of the permanent record.
Okay, we have an organization who says we have a Apple heavy environment rather than Windows. It's a university. We do use 365 for some things. How well does Veeam do in an environment like ours, Apple heavy?
Oh, it's not an issue because we're backing up MS365, right? We're not using an agent on the Mac or on the Apple infrastructure to back up the data. We're going directly to the source, which is the Microsoft Data Center MS365 system. So if you're using a Windows machine, a Mac, a Linux desktop, that doesn't impact how Veeam works when it comes to backing up MS365 because we're backing up the service, not the endpoint. You can, if you like, use Veeam backup and replication, and we have an agent for Mac, no issue there. But just remember that we're focused on MS365 with VB for 365. We're not dealing with the end user. We're not dealing with the endpoint. That's irrelevant to us. We're going straight to the source.
We've got a scalability question here, Patrick. Individual mentioned, look, we've got 8,000 mailboxes with 1 GB or larger mailboxes. Does Cirrus scale well to larger customers?
I would say larger customers are going to want to look at Cirrus just because my experience, when you get involved in backing up large email organizations, the growth, it's just better to go with something like a Cirrus where you have it being handled by someone else. So 8,000 users, not a problem. In fact, before I even talk about Cirrus, my experience and our best practices, you can easily have 5,000 users backed up by just one server running VB 365. Add a proxy to that, you double it. And we've easily grown software-only deployments to 40,000 users. So I'm not worried by that 8,000 number. But if I start thinking about the time and effort that's going to be spent by my team, at that point, I start to think, would it be more cost-effective for me to go with a backup as a service solution? And 9 times out of 10, yeah, it's going to just make more sense because the moment I'm doing it myself, I'm in charge of that storage, I'm in charge of that compute, I'm in charge of that networking. Well, why not take advantage of unlimited storage when it comes to Cirrus? Why not take advantage of experts who spend nothing but all day working on MS365 compliance to be in charge of the networking and the security? It just makes better sense because I'm not most likely in the business of being an MS365 guru. I'm trying to provide a service to my organization. Cirrus, it makes sense for them to have MS365 gurus. It makes sense for them to have Veeam gurus. So at that point, the larger I am, the more appealing, the more I can save by having Cirrus be my one-stop shop.
Excellent. Great response there. One last question that I'll take here is support. Do we offer support for backup of public folders?
I do know that we can back up public folders, and we do support that. In fact, when it comes to our licensing, there is a FAQ, which I wish I had the link for right now, which goes over the details. Shared mailboxes, we're able to back up as well, and that doesn't require a license. So public folders, yeah. What I would suggest is, depending on how that public folder is set up, you may want to, how can I put it? You may want to, again, look at the Cirrus solution, because when we start talking about public folders, they become the kitchen junk drawer of an organization, and people just throw stuff into them, and they grow. And because nobody's responsible for that public folder from an end user point of view, they just, hey, toss it into the public folder, toss it into the public folder. It's not using my home drive, it's not using my personal share, throw it into the public folder. So again, that's where Cirrus can become a real advantage, because you have that unlimited storage. I'm not saying that you shouldn't monitor your public folders. I'm just saying if something's going to be abused, I'm going to bet on the public folder being the first thing to be taken advantage of.
Absolutely. We did have a few questions that are very specific around performance and throttling and things of that nature. I do recommend that if there are specific performance questions that you have, that you do reach out to us, and we'll be more than happy to help you with those. We do know that throttling can become an issue when it comes to backup. I think we know that, Patrick. But I think there's a lot of things in the works, especially namely our API integration with Microsoft is one that is really going to help address recovery speeds and initial backup speeds.
Absolutely. And this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, Ed. Where do I want to invest as an organization? And it could be that Cirrus is the answer there, because the larger, let's face it, the larger a customer is of Microsoft, the better results they're going to get, right, when it comes to these services. And you mentioned it earlier, 18 million people are using Veeam. 18 million mailboxes are being backed up by Veeam. And so Cirrus, with dedicated staff, consuming Azure resources, consuming MS365 resources, they're going to have the context, they're going to have the expertise to ensure that performance is good for the service they provide.
Right.
You may not have that as an individual, especially if you're a small shop.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Well, thank you, everyone. This does conclude our webinar. We really appreciate the questions. If you do have any other specific questions or concerns, you can feel free to reach out, and we will definitely get back to you. So again, we appreciate you taking the time, and we hope this was helpful for the checklist for 2024. Take care, everyone. Cheers.
Thank you all.
Wow, thank you, Ed and Patrick, for putting together a fantastic presentation, for all of your insights in the Q&A. Just great stuff. So much information, so much there about Microsoft 365 and how to really make it work for you. That's something that so many organizations continue to struggle with to this day, including my own organization in some ways. So thank you so much for that education today. Now, we are wrapping up this event, everyone, folks, but we do have one more piece of business to take care of, and that is giving out the $250 Amazon gift card. As I said up front, you do have to be present for the entire event to be eligible to win. And we do have our winner for today, and that winner is Dolores Walton from Virginia. Congratulations to you, Dolores. We are going to be in touch with you ASAP to get you your card. And with that, folks, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Veeam for making this event possible. I want to thank you attendees for being here with us, for your great questions, for your interest in the topic. It's always a pleasure to spend part of my day with you, and look forward to seeing you in the next one. I am going to now get something to drink and try to stay cool in this blistering day. Don't know if that's the case where all of you are, but it sure is the case right here where I live in Maryland. So going to go do that now. You can get back to your day, folks. Have a great afternoon.